Good morning, everyone. So as Lisa mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the new pavement marking retroreflectivity requirements. With us today is Tim Snyder, who's a safety and operations engineer with the Federal Highway Connecticut Division office. And we also have with us Scott Yeomans, who's the associate manager of streets in South Windsor. Scott and I are going to talk a little bit later after Tim talks to us about the requirements about actually using the unit to measure pavement marking retroreflectivity that I will tell you all about somewhere in between here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim and let him talk to you about the new requirements. Tim?
All right, give me a second. I'll just share my screen with you all and get the presentation up. And if you just let me know if you see it, that'll be helpful.
It's not there yet, but there it is.
All right, sorry about that.
No problem. Take it away.
1 second still. Okay. All right, so good morning. Thank you for having me here again. As Melissa said, my name is Timothy Snyder. I'm with the Federal Highway Connecticut Division office here as an operations and safety engineer, and here to talk to you about. Give me a second here. This is not working for Melissa. I can't see my own slideshow. There we go. Excellent. So talk about the maintaining pavement marking retroreflectivity. This is a new rule that was recently published in the Federal Register, and it amends the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUTCD, image of that up here on the right. So hopefully you're familiar with that document. If not, we have a link for you later on to share that with you. Disclaimer here, just to be clear that this presentation does not have the force or effect of law, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so August 5th, revision number 3 to the MUTCD was published in the Federal Register. This also, just to be clear, this is revision 3 to the 2009 MUTCD. If you're aware, there's a rulemaking going on to update the MUTCD. This is separate from that, and all the changes we're seeing here will be incorporated into the next version of the MUTCD when that's released. The original notice of proposed amendment was actually for this rule that we're talking about here was published actually in 2010. There was a supplemental notice published in 2017 to address and clear up some of the comments and concerns that were in there. And so now here we are, August 5th. They published the final register, the final rule in the Federal Register. Its effective date was September 6th of this year, and then we have a compliance date, one compliance date emanating from this, which is September 6th, 4 years from the effective date. Okay, so what is the problem? The problem is that nighttime fatal crashes are approximately 3 times higher. Crash rate, I should say, is approximately 3 times higher than what it is in the daytime crash, the daytime crashes rate. Prior to this revision, the MUTCD already required pavement markings that must be visible at night, shall be retroreflective unless ambient illumination exists. That retroreflectivity, but just to put everybody on the same page, the retroreflectivity is the material property that returns light back to the light source. So the viewer, the person in the car, the retroreflectivity captures that light and sends it back to the person in the car from your headlights. Objects with higher retroreflectivity will appear brighter at night and less retroreflective objects. So it's critical that our traffic control devices that should be seen at nighttime are retroreflective to an acceptable degree, such that we can see those markings at night. And this includes, and is the focus of our presentation here, on longitudinal pavement markings. Okay, so visibility is critical at nighttime. We recognize the importance of the retroreflectivity to try to address the nighttime crashes that are overrepresented. Now, during the daytime, you got lots of cues, visual cues as you drive along the roadway. You can see surrounding landscapes, buildings, utility poles, tree lines, the roadway alignment, the shoulders, guardrails, vegetation, etc. But you also see traffic control devices such as the pavement markings, and they help guide us and understand and anticipate which way the road's going to turn. At nighttime, you're left really with only the retroreflective traffic control devices that are available. So you lose all those other conditions unless there's an ambient or other lighting provided. All right, so get to the revisions, pretty straightforward. There's 3 sections to revise in the MUTCD. The bulk of the revisions are in section 3A.03, and I'll go over those in detail later on in this presentation. Also let you know that in the introduction, we added a new compliance date in table 1.2, and that compliance date is basically the bulk of this presentation, which says by September 6th, 2026, you should have a method in place and used to maintain minimum retroreflectivity on these pavement markings. And then finally, there's an update to the listings of publications that exist in the MUTCD that are referenced. And we added the FHWA's methods for maintaining pavement marking retroreflectivity document into that reference of publications. And again, I'll show you a little bit more about that publication later on. Okay, so section 3A.03. This is maintaining minimum pavement marking retroreflectivity. Previously, this section was in the MUTCD, but it was blank in anticipation of this rule coming through. So we've gotten, it's been 12 years since we proposed the rule, and so we're getting right to it in a good old time. So this is the standard, and I'm going to read it out to you. That says, except as provided in paragraph 5, a method designed to maintain retroreflectivity at or above 50 millicandelas per square meter per lux under dry conditions shall be used for pavement markings on roadways with speed limits of 35 miles per hour or greater. So the bulk of this is setting the threshold of 50 millicandelas. I'm going to just say millicandelas as we go forward because I can't get it all out, not cleanly at least, so apologize for that. But it sets the minimum retroreflectivity of 50 millicandelas. This is measured under dry conditions. It applies to only longitudinal markings, lane lines, center lines, edge lines. And it applies only to roadways with a 35 mile an hour, posted speed limits of 35 miles an hour or greater. It should be noted that other markings that must be visible at night are still required to be retroreflective, but this minimum threshold is not applicable to those specific markings. Okay, paragraph 3 provides some guidance. And this is, again, bringing in the Federal Highways methods for maintaining pavement marking retroreflectivity document as an appropriate methodologies that should be used to establish your agency's methods for maintaining these retroreflectivities. As previously mentioned, this document is available on our website, and we'll have some links. I believe the T-Squared Center is going to post some links in the chat later on. So all the links that you see here will be available to you guys. Okay, so paragraph 5 has options for exclusions to an agency's method. These are exclusions which can be excluded from the provisions of 1 and 2, and these include pavement markings where ambient light is adequate and visible. So again, the markings must be visible. Markings that must be visible at nighttime need to be retroreflective unless ambient lighting is provided. So if you have adequate ambient lighting, you may be able to find a way to not implement this on those roadways specifically. Streets or highways with an ADT less than 6,000 vehicles per day. Dotted extension lines through intersections and interchanges. Curb markings, pavement marking spaces, and shared pavement markings as well. So these are optional exclusions to an agency's method. This is an option to the standard. While agencies, again, are allowed to exclude pavement markings in these circumstances from retroreflectivity maintenance, don't forget they still need to be retroreflective per MUTCD. Okay, this is just a little bit of a summary of what we just mostly went through. Is the table. This table is not in the MUTCD, just kind of trying to summarize up what we saw. So again, compliance with this final rule requires an agency to implement and use a method that's designed to maintain the longitudinal pavement markings at or above specific minimum dry retroreflectivity levels. So you see under 35 miles per hour, we don't have a specific retroreflective level. Of at 35 or greater, you have the 50 millicandelas. There's also guidance in there for roadways with a design speed limit of 70 miles per hour or greater. Since we don't have those here in Connecticut, I decided not to focus too much on that. Okay. In addition, there's a support statement that talks about exclusions, and there's a little bit of logic here as to why this is a support statement and the other longitudinal lines are an option. And it's it basically just making sure that the logic of the MUTCD, where things are required and where things are just being clarified. So this is a clarification that these are non-longitudinal markings. And so here we have transverse markings such as a stop bar, word symbols and arrow markings. So these do not have to be included within the methods per required by this rule. Crosswalk markings and chevron, diagonals, and crosshatch markings are not longitudinal, and accordingly they are not required. However, again, it'd be appropriate and fine for any agency to incorporate these types of markings or some subset thereof into your methodologies and methods of maintenance to ensure that you have adequate retroreflectivity for those. I'll just mark that a lot of the limits that we're seeing here, say with longitudinal markings versus say the transverse markings, is based upon the available research that was done and conducted in support of this rule, and also the thresholds that we're looking at, specifically the 6,000 vehicles per day, is tied to some of the thresholds within the MUTCD for when these types of lines are required. So there was a push to kind of include lower than 6,000 ADT as part of this rule. However, there was a concern that agencies may opt to eliminate non-required lines should they be held to the standard. So they kept the threshold for this standard at and above 6,000 because that's where those lines are required by the MUTCD. Okay, there are some special. Yes.
Sorry, Tim, I'm going to interrupt you. Normally I would wait to ask this question until you were done.
Please go right ahead.
But I think it's important to bring it up right now while you're talking about this specific thing. So Dustin Baldus asked in the chat, what, if you know, and I don't know that you know, but what the logic is on not including crosswalks since we're so concerned about pedestrians on our roadways.
Good question. I'll give you the soft answer here. I will advise if anybody really wanted to dig into it, the Federal Register link where they published the final rule provides an excellent explanation for the various limits that they provided in this final rule, the 6,000 and 35 miles per hour. Like I said, the research that they used to develop the 50 millicandelas as a threshold was focused only on longitudinal lines. So they didn't have research that gave them thresholds of acceptable retroreflectivities for other types of line markings. And so I think they didn't want to include anything that was not backed up and validated by research and documentation. The additional one is a 35 miles per hour. I don't know if they're asking about that as well, but I'll brush into that. Yeah.
Do you think that crosswalks will be added at some point? I mean, they need to be retroreflective anyway, but do you think that there will be a criteria set for them at some point?
I could not anticipate and would not anticipate where the MUTCD is going. It could be possibly incorporated later on in some future rule. We are working right now on getting the MUTCD update out. I think that's scheduled to be out in the spring. And there is a requirement in the bill, the new infrastructure law, that I believe the MUTCD, I'm going to get this slightly wrong, if it's 2 or 4 years. I think it might be
every 2. I think it's every 2
years. Thank you. Yeah. So there's a requirement to update the MUTCD every 2 years in law now. So they'll start working towards that. Exactly where this goes, it's going to be based upon, I think, a large part of the research that they have to support thresholds and acceptable retroreflectivity levels to make sure that it's sponsored, it's supported by research.
Okay. And so, I think Tim, I feel comfortable saying Tim agrees with me when I say to those listening, make your crosswalks retroreflective regardless of whether or not there's a minimum
absolutely
criteria.
No, and again, all your markings that must be visible at night must be retroreflective. So this is just really establishing a higher threshold of maintenance to say, hey, we want them at 50 millicandelas under dry conditions.
A measurable unit. This is really right. This establishes that measurable unit and a method.
And the method is you implement the method and you use the method and you replace the markings when that method dictates such.
Thanks. Sorry. Go on.
No problem at all. Feel free. So there's a few special circumstances. This is paragraph 7. It's offered as support, and it just recognizes that there's some situations that will periodically cause pavement marking retroreflectivities to drop below minimum levels. So in these circumstances, you get a little bit of an opportunity to not have to worry about them exactly at that immediate point, but isolated locations of abnormal degradation. You got some material failure or something for a section. There's some opportunity to recognize that as not going to be putting you out of compliance. Periods immediately preceding your resurfacing and reconstruction. And then you have some unanticipated events they offer, such as equipment breakdowns, material shortages, etc. And then obviously just snow maintenance operations. And the snow maintenance operations is not saying, hey, we have snow, so I don't have to worry about this, but it's acknowledging that in the winter, you may have pavement markings that trend down below that 50 millicandles threshold. Assumedly, your methodology is addressing that, and when it becomes available to replace those markings, your method and implementation goes out there and does such when the weather provides it. So when these circumstances occur, compliance is still considered to be achieved if a reasonable course of action is taken to resume, maintaining that minimal retroreflectivity in a timely manner. And again, there's some more. If you wanted to, the Federal Register again provides a good dissertation discussion as to how each one of these was kind of ballied about and determined to be incorporated. Okay, so then you get to the methodologies. Here's a link. Again, I believe the T-Squared Center is going to send out this link to y'all in the chat or some other way, but this is a link to our methods for maintaining pavement marking retroreflectivity document the Federal Highways released in concert with this new rule. It provides a number of different methodologies that can be utilized or can be utilized. This is I should say that this document is part of a support statement, and you can devise other methodologies using an engineering study if you so wish, but there are 5 specific ones provided as systematic means for agencies to ensure their longitudinal markings are maintained at their proper retroreflectivities. Use of the method implies not only determining when the pavement markings are to be refreshed, but also scheduling and doing that refreshing. There are 5 methods in here. The one we're going to focus on here is the most common and typical, which is the measured retroreflectivity method. So this is the method you go out there with the device and you directly measure those values and compare it to the thresholds you have to determine where you need to update them. The report also includes an appendix geared to smaller agencies with limited experience to help them consider and develop a method. I know we have some other speakers, and Melissa's talking about some of the experiences they have with measuring retroreflectivities. Okay, and then finally, this is, if you haven't heard this already in my presentation, I'm going to say it again. Markings, this is in the MUTCD, markings that must be visible at night, crosswalks and stop bars shall be retroreflective unless ambient illumination assures those markings are adequately visible. And not that, and all markings on the interstate have to be retroreflective regardless of lighting conditions. So I think that's our standards. Here's a quick look at some of the resources we have. We have a website. We have the MUTCD website. We got a nighttime visibility website. That methods for maintaining pavement marking retroreflectivity is a federal highway document that talks about those various methodologies that you could explore and use. And again, there's our pavement marking retroreflectivity site for your use. There's some good resources out there as well. So with that, Melissa, I think I'm done.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tim. And I know Lisa has a couple of links she's already started putting in the chat. So, folks, feel free to follow up on what Tim just presented to you. You can follow some of those links and do that. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the handheld unit. So Tim mentioned that one of the best methods, or the federal manual doesn't prioritize them, but I'm going to. I think one of the best methods is actually measuring your pavement markings. So with that in mind, and knowing that this was coming, the T2 Center actually did purchase a handheld retroreflectometer for pavement markings. You can see it on the screen here. It is a fantastic unit. If any of you have ever borrowed the Sign Retroreflectometer, it is very similar. It comes from the same company. It's a Road Vista unit. And it works in much the same way. The main difference is, of course, you're moving it along your pavement markings and measuring those rather than putting it up against your signs and measuring that. So, just again, you can kind of see it here. You can kind of see my, that's me holding it in that one picture. But we do have with us, I introduced him at the beginning, Scott Yeomans from South Windsor, who is my first user of the unit. He actually asked if he could borrow the Sign one, and then said, "Hey, do you happen to have a pavement marking one?" And I hadn't even announced that we had purchased this yet. It wasn't even up on our website. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So Scott's been using it for a little while to do some measurements in South Windsor. Scott, good morning. Hi.
Good morning.
So I think the first thing is maybe just if you could generally let the folks know how easy you found it to use the unit and to figure it out, to kind of, get it started and get going on what you're doing.
Yeah, it's actually very easy to use. It's pretty intuitive, and the people at Road Vista, I did have some questions and reached out to them and very, very supportive in answering my questions. And I got the unit after we started our annual waterborne painting. So some of our roads were already done, but I was able to get out and measure quite a few of them and kind of come up to the conclusion that our waterborne roads, which we do annually, had held at the end of their 12-month life cycle. So I'm comfortable to say that doing the waterborne roads annually, we're not going to fall below that 50 candela mark. Most of the markings were in the high 50s to up into the 80s and 90s. Then I moved to our epoxy roads, so a little bit all over the lot. Some of our epoxy roads don't even meet the threshold of the standard. So I have some paint markings out there that are 12 years old that are still in the 125 range. And then other roads that are likely going to fall within the standard. It looks like they're aging out closer to the 10-year mark, but I'm still taking some measurements. I hope to conclude this week. I've been chipping away at it, and but going back to your original question, that the ease of using the unit is pretty remarkable, and I think it's it's really kind of a great tool for us to get a baseline and come up with a plan on what is going to be our marking plan in the future.
Okay, and a question just came in for you, Scott. Dustin's asking, does that mean that you will extend your cycle of painting yearly or keep the same schedule?
So the waterborne, I'm going to keep the same schedule. I mean, that seems to be the way to go, because we're getting close to that 50 mark on quite a few of the roads, and I would have to guess those roads aren't going to be able to make a 2-year cycle. What I'm going to do next is shoot some of the newly painted waterborne roads to get a baseline of new. But Road Vista surprisingly said wait a minimum of 2 weeks, closer to a month before you go out and shoot a newly painted road to get your most accurate reading. So that's next on my agenda, is to see what's the baseline average for new waterborne paint markings, but I'm not thinking that we're gonna change the cycle on water, but it could impact epoxy.
Okay. Okay. So I have a couple of questions. I guess we'll start with, one is, so I know that the unit, you tell the unit, you're doing white, you're doing yellow, but you can also tell it what roadway material that you are measuring on. So what roadway material have you been measuring your pavement markings on? What do you use in South Windsor that you've been measuring?
We have rubber chip and conventional chip and bituminous. Those are all selections that are available in the unit, and I have to select that, whether I'm doing a white edge line or if I'm doing double yellow center line, and then the pavement treatment. I haven't experimented with telling it that I'm doing bituminous on a chip seal road to see if the values are any different, but I've tried to be very careful about making sure that I'm selecting the right paint color in road treatment.
Okay. And are you seeing any, are they holding up well on all the roadway materials that you're measuring so far? Like
I say, on the waterborne roads, it seems like that bituminous holds up a bit better than chip seal roads. I'm just really getting into the epoxy roads, which we don't have any epoxy on chip seal anyway, but it does seem that bituminous is holding up a little bit better than on the chip seal road. I think just because of the surface.
Sure. Another question just came in from Terry Thompson. Do you have any recessed waterborne? And if so, have you measured those?
We do not currently. I believe that we're going to be adding some in the future on a road that was recently resurfaced. There are recessed lines on state roads in town, but obviously that's not under our purview. But I believe that we're going to very soon have at least one road that's going to have recessed lines. And I think that's kind of another thing to really take a look at. And if you have two roads that are done at the same time, one being recessed and one not, typical, similar ADTs, kind of see how that performance with the recessed lines holds up over time.
Sure, absolutely. That'd be something to compare. If you can get that data, that'd be great. Speaking of data, so just want to mention, so the unit obviously, is recording all of these measurements as you go along. It does have a built-in printer, but, I recommend to users, of course, you don't want to print all of your data, right? Because you'll go through my receipt spool pretty quickly, but obviously the data is saved in the unit, and then you can, easily convert that data to an Excel spreadsheet. You can do it to a shape file if you have a GIS inventory of your pavement markings. Scott, I don't think that you've downloaded any of the data yet, have you?
I have not.
Okay. No, have you seen it on the screen now?
I've printed out a couple, but
yeah, that's okay.
To your point, depending on how many roads that you got done shooting, you're printing out a register receipt that's so
like one from CVS.
Yeah.
Recording.
Yeah. You have your card? Yes, I do.
Well, we got some feedback there. I'm not sure, but sorry about that.
That's okay. But no, I'm going to try to, we talked last week. I intend to try to download that, so I have it, here, and if I'm unsuccessful, I guess you've experimented with it. you can extract that data for me, but I am going to try to get that out myself.
Yeah. I mean, again, Scott's the first user of the new unit. So other than going through it a little myself when we first received it and looking through and kind of figuring it out enough to be able to loan it to somebody and explain to them what to do with it a little bit. Right, I haven't had the opportunity to pull any data out of it yet, but I do know that you can get it out in a couple of different ways. So depending on how you maintain your inventory, I want to actually back up just a little bit and talk about the ease of the initial setup of the unit. And I do want to just mention for folks that we're putting together a little instructional video, very short little instructional video that I had the benefit of my friends in Southbury Public Works volunteered to help me out. So we have some recordings of them using it just to kind of show people what it looks like. So that video will be out very soon for you to watch if you're interested. But one of the things that we highlight in the video is the initial setup actually of the unit. So, Scott's mentioned you can put in your color pavement marking, you can put in your material. And I think that the nicest thing, the easiest thing about the unit is it's a very simple pass-fail requirement. So you can see the number, obviously, right? We're trying to get that 50 millicandelas, but you also very quickly can see whether or not your pavement marking meets that requirement once you set it. So, I don't know, Scott, I mean, how you feel about that, but obviously the measurements are important and they're in there saved in the unit. I personally just liked being able to kind of roll along, you hit it and you very quickly go, okay, that one passes, move to the next spot. And you can look at the numbers later.
More like looking at the numbers. So, yeah, because I'm kind of curious, with this all being very new, how if right now I just did pass fail, it's am I at 49 and I failed, or am I at 19? So sure. It's, I think, very helpful to kind of to see the numbers and see the values that you're looking for, so you can start to make some educated assumptions on how you're going to treat these lines in the future. The other thing when you're talking about putting in streets too is if you're doing a long street or long segments that you can put in a cross street. So if you're on Main Street, you can put on you can put at the intersection of A Street. And I do try to shoot that same line in both directions on the same spot. Mm-hmm. And those values do change, and that's because the direction that the paint machine put the lines down gives a different retroreflectivity to those line markings. So it's not a huge difference, but there's a difference there of a few points.
Yeah. And Road Vista recommends you walk the line the same way that it was marked when it was painted. So if you walk in the same direction of travel and measure it, they will tell you that that's the more accurate measurement than if you go in the other way. But it is interesting to see the difference sometimes. If you just turn around and shoot a couple of segments of the line. I did just want to mention, we had a comment come in that ConDOT has done a recessed all-weather tape pavement marking on 2 roads here in Newington, Route 173 and 174. Initial reflectivity test came back at almost 1,200 for white edge lines. So that's pretty good. I would say that's pretty good. So Scott, anything else, any other tips, tricks that people might be interested in that you can think of about the unit? And then I'm gonna share a couple of things with folks as
Yeah,
well.
no, like I say, it's actually pretty simple. I found, just like when you're actually using it, setting it all up on, I just put it on the tailgate of my truck and set the unit on the case and assemble it and lock everything in place before I even put it on the ground. There's more stability that way, especially if you're working alone. But it's very easy to use, and I think it's going to be helpful to communities down the road. And I'll get that thing back to you very shortly. I'm wrapping up here.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully after today, I'll have a few more people interested in borrowing it. What I did want to let people know is that you heard Tim mention, right, that criteria of 35 miles per hour or higher, 6,000 ADT. So again, that's not to say that your pavement markings that don't meet that criteria shouldn't be retroreflective, because they need to be, they should be. This is just the ones that you now have to establish a method to measure, right? And the measured unit has been established. But we at the T2 Center thought, okay, well, here's another requirement that's coming down on folks in public works, and one more thing to add to the long list of responsibilities that you all have. So we were trying to think of how we could potentially help you, other than buying the unit, to make it a little easier. And so what we have started doing, and what we will soon have ready to share with everyone here in the state, is we started compiling a list based on that criteria. We've put together a list of every municipal road that actually has an approved 35 mile per hour or higher speed limit based on the list at OSTA. So if you have a road that you have not properly submitted to the state, it wouldn't have been on that list, and so I don't know about it. But if you have one of those, you should get it on that list ASAP. But based on OSTA's list, we went through and we narrowed down every road in every municipality that's locally owned that has a 35 mile per hour or greater speed limit. From there, we are cross-referencing with ADTs, so that eventually what we will have is a list for every municipality of the roads that you have in your community that meet that criteria and that need to be part of this requirement. Now, what that means for some of you is you may only have one road in your entire town that you have to establish this method for and meet this minimum reflectivity requirement. Certainly, Scott, you mentioned some of your roads that have recessed, or state roads, right? So you're not measuring state roads. So in some of our more rural communities, that certainly eliminates some of those roads that meet the criteria because they're state roads. But we are putting the list together. We are trying to make it a little easier for folks to try to get that information. We can you'll be getting an email from me that basically says, based on the requirements, here's the road or a couple of roads or however many roads in your municipality. And then you have that list to work off of. So we're hoping that helps folks. I see a couple of notes in the chat about that. So, you are welcome, everyone. We know that there's a lot going on, and we know that having this requirement, although it's extremely important, that I heard from some folks going, oh my God, what does this mean? All my center lines, all my lane lines, all my edge lines. And that's not what it means. They should be retroreflective anyway, but it doesn't mean you have to go out and measure every single one right away. I'm happy to loan the unit out. I hope it's always out on loan. I hope everyone's always using it to measure, but again, we just are trying to make it a little easier. I do want to go back because I saw a question here for, let's see. Do you think there will be funding opportunities to have towns acquire this equipment? 100% towns will need this or create a sharing coalition. Yeah, I mean, I have no idea. And then Tiger followed it up with how much does the unit cost? So the unit's about $16,000. So that's why we purchased one to add to the equipment loan program, because it's clearly an expense that a lot of Connecticut municipalities will not be able to afford. Certainly, you know, I mean, it is expensive for a piece of equipment. But, you know, we felt that it was important to be able to loan it out. I don't know if there will be any funding opportunities. I mean, Tim, I don't know if you know, I certainly haven't gone through all of the bipartisan infrastructure law. I do know that there's some grant opportunities scattered throughout for different types of equipment. I mean, I know specifically there's, you know, drones, I know, but I don't know that there's anything for smaller types of equipment like this.
I can't think of a specific program that I'm aware of that would be available to fund something like that. Yeah, probably most best case scenario would be looking at the highway safety funding. But that does have some specific requirements associated with fatal and serious injury, crash data, et cetera. So yeah, probably on the federal level, it'd be a little bit of a challenge to find a funding source that gets it down to the local level.
Yeah. I did also see, so Joe's asking, how is that list being developed, GIS? No, so it's an Excel spreadsheet right now. You know, again, we went through and looked at OSTA's speed limit list for every municipality, pulled out the ones that met the speed limit criteria. We put those in an Excel spreadsheet, and now we're going to match those to ADTs. We have the benefit of having not only DOT's count information, but also the Safety Research Center has been developing an ADT tool. It's not out to the municipalities yet, but because I work with them, I have access to it. So Shan from the Safety Research Center has shared some of that with me so that I can go in and we can pull some of the ADT information that we don't have from the DOT site. Everything is in GIS. Eric Jackson knows that we want to consider this. Yeah, no, everything is in GIS, but that doesn't help me when I'm just trying to send a list of a street to a town. You know, I love GIS, Joe, but it's not always the easiest way to get information to folks. But yeah, I mean, you know, and initially, you know, pulling the speed limits was given to, you know, our student. So rather than train our student on the GIS system, it was easier to say, just go through these lists, you know, these PDFs on the OSTA website. And I'm going to go back. There was another one. Oh, okay. So Chuck Harlow, would this be eligible for safety money? Are you talking about the retroreflectometer, or are you talking about, you mean the unit itself, Chuck? You can unmute if it's easier.
It's easier to unmute. So I'm talking about the unit itself because it is a requirement for MUTCD, which I believe was probably propagated because of safety, if I'm not mistaken, Tim. And so I'm not sure if that would make it, or if towns could get together and buy, like maybe the COGS could buy a few of these or something. But they obviously 16 grand is a big chunk of money, and so there's maybe share. You know, you can share devices. I know you have one. I don't see you guys buying more than one. That's a big hit. But is there eligibility for safety money to do the work, to actually make the measurements? Is it eligibility to replace the markings that don't meet the requirements? These are all the things that came up when this thing came out in 2010 that I believe CONDOT may have commented on, as in me. And where's the cost? Who's going to pay for this? Because there is effort in this, and I believe we need, having brighter markings is great. I love that. I love the idea, but it's the devil's always in the details, and I'm not sure if that's all spelled out in the Federal Register yet. I copied those links so I can look through those things to see what's out there. But because markings is a big issue for roadway departure is a big issue, right? So that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, and thank you for unmuting. I think it's a little easier sometimes, if you have a question that we're going back and forth on, but yeah, I mean, obviously we know that, this is safety focused, right? And roadway departures, like you mentioned, Chuck, are definitely an issue. I mean, they're a focus area in our strategic highway safety plan. Again, I mean, I think the funding question, and maybe that is a question for folks to ask their COG. I don't know. I mean, smaller pieces of equipment, I know one of the COGs purchased a few traffic counters that they maintain for their member towns to borrow. But those are a little less, they purchased a couple of them, so a little less expensive than one pavement marking retroreflectometer. I don't know if that's something that could happen, and just have a program at the COG where you could borrow it as well. Like I said, we do have the one. I'm happy to have it on constant loan if that's what ends up happening. We have no issue with that. Certainly we purchased it for it to be used. I certainly don't want a $16,000 piece of equipment just hanging around in my office. So we want it out there being used. I don't know. I don't know if, how folks, and to your second point about then, figuring out how to pay for the markings that don't meet the requirement. I think that's something that municipalities, I mean, you budget for your pavement markings, it may just be a matter of reprioritizing that budget. Scott, I don't know if you have a comment on that part of it, but, I think that's the point of this, is to figure out where you need to put your focus.
Yeah, that's a concern for us too. Is this going to cost us more money down the road? So, it's all left to be told. So we still have to identify, which of our roads actually fall under the standard. So, I mean, I know where the 35-mile-an-hour roads are. I just don't know currently what the ADTs are for some of them. I'm sure no question that we're going to have some that will fall under the standard, but exactly which ones and how that's going to impact budgets left to be seen yet.
Alyssa, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
I'll just throw in there also, I mean, the measured retroreflectometer approach is just one of the methods. Obviously, I think for, thank the T-Squared Center for putting all together that list, but I think as many of you will probably come up to see, you may not have that much roadway that is encompassed by this rule. Now, again, we'll encourage you to look at the rest of your pavement markings in the universe and make sure they're all as retroreflective as possible. But there are other methods that are not as in the document that is on FHWA's site for measuring and documenting your retroreflectivities. Some of them are less intensive on the specific measured results that you can explore, and then you can combine various methods utilizing an engineering study to document, hey, this is our methodology for maintaining this minimum retroreflectivity. So you don't need a $16,000 piece of equipment to do it, but thank you for the T-Squared Center for
of course
getting the device and making it available. I think that would probably be the most direct and easiest for most of the towns to take on. So I think that's a good approach, but there are other methodologies to explore for at least measuring and documenting your methods in use. So I just want to make that clear.
Scott, I talked about some of them, right? Scott, you could, you're almost old enough yourself, right, Scott?
Our director wants us to look at more than one option for maintaining retroreflectivity. The unit being one, but explore some of the other options that are out there. So
yeah,
that's going to be probably part of the plan, because that's probably not a bad way to handle this. I once now that you've told everybody that you got this unit, it's going to, like you said, probably be continuously on. I won't see that thing for 10 years now.
Let's hope so. I'm hoping that's what happens.
Fine.
Otherwise, like Scott and I were joking about it when I dropped the unit off. Otherwise, if you are old enough and work in public works, you can drive the roads and at night, and you can see if you can see them.
Melissa, you need to be a passenger in the car. You're
Yes,
not
I know.
allowed to
You
drive.
have to ride. You have to ride with a driver, and determine if you can see the pavement markings.
Yeah, for us 60 plusers.
Yeah, I'm not there yet, but
Unfortunately.
but so yeah, so that's kind of you know, the requirements, obviously, and you've heard some of Scott's experience with the unit. I do hope, you know, for those of you listening, and we've recorded this, so for folks who watch it afterwards, even, you know, go on our website. There's an equipment loan form you can fill out. I'd rather have a queue of folks and just keep moving it around than sitting around collecting dust, like I said. So it's not the only way, as Tim mentioned, but I do think it's a good way, even if it's, you know, one of a couple of ways that you measure. That might even be a good experiment, Scott, right? Once you have the measured units, like what you know your road is, to then go out and drive it and see to yourself, okay, so on this road that measured right at the line, maybe, how well can I, you know, can someone actually see it at night who's riding in a car?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the standard says that, you know, it's a trained individual, and what that actually means, I'm not certain, but I think that, to your point, you know, we have some baselines of where our lines are, and like you're saying, drive it at night, and what is that 60, you know, plus person saying? You know, I can't see those lines, or no, it's fine for me. But yeah, I think having more than one option to take a look at this is going to be, down the road, is going to be important.
Yep, absolutely. So thank you both. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Scott, for chatting with me today. I think, you know, this is important, but I also do think, you know, once we get that list put together and finalized, I'm hoping that it's not too big of an undertaking for a lot of our municipalities. I do appreciate you spending your time here with us today. If anybody does have any questions that come up afterwards, please feel free to reach out. I, of course, have Tim's contact information. I won't give out Scott's necessarily unless he wants me to, but everyone knows you anyway. Everyone knows.
We're all in this together. That's fine.
But thank you all very much for your time this morning. I appreciate it. I hope to see some loan forms coming in from some of you in the near future. And with that, have a good rest of your day. Thank you.